Hey, what's going on, everyone? Good morning. Good morning. Your friend Dean Kulaweera here. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in live every week, Wednesdays, 11 a.m. Eastern Time Zone. I'm right here live to share job search tips, advice, and strategies to all you job seekers out there. But today, it's not going to be me speaking, doing all the speaking. All right. Today, I have a special guest with me. I have my friend, Dr. Amanda Rico, tuning in. She's a resume expert. Had her on the show. I think, I mean, it feels like recently, but I think it was like, over a year ago probably. And I had such great feedback from those of you who tune in for that segment, and I just had to bring her back on again to talk resume tips, resume strategies, and all that stuff, right? Now, before I get into that, don't be shy, folks. Feel free to introduce yourself in the comments. Let us know who you are, where you're tuning in from. I'm going to bring Dr. Rico on shortly. Any resume related questions you have, any personal challenges you're having right now in regards to your resume, you're not sure about certain things, feel free to put it in the comments. I'm going to do my best to have Dr. Rico respond to at least most of your questions out there. And I have my own questions to ask as well. All right. So we're going to have a fantastic, action packed, informative session here today. So, hey, feel free to tune introduce yourself in the comments as well. So we got someone says, "Hi, Dean. Hope you're doing amazing. Thank you." Whoever you're, a mystery person. I know sometimes it doesn't show the name. So, hey, I appreciate you tuning in and thanks so much for that. Hope you're doing great as well. So, for those of you tuning in for the first time, appreciate you tuning in. And you can also follow me on my other social channels. I post a lot of content on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok as well. So all my other social links are at this website right here. You can go to linktree.ee / DK Tech Recruiter, linktr.ee / DK Tech Recruiter if you want to follow me on my other social channels. Also, make sure, folks, you subscribe to my LinkedIn newsletter. Every week on Mondays, I release a LinkedIn newsletter segment where I discuss various recruitment as well as job search related tips and advice. So make sure you check that out, and appreciate everyone who has already subscribed. Also, today's stream is brought to you by my company, which is Tech Recruiters 360. If you're an IT professional anywhere in the Greater Toronto Area or Canada, you're looking for work, feel free to reach out and find out if there's any positions I can currently help you with that I'm currently recruiting on. And also, if you're an organization, you're in need or struggling to find IT professionals and IT talent for your team, feel free to reach out to me as well. I'm happy to see if there's any way I can personally assist you. All right. So that being said, let's see if we got any comments here from people tuning in. Okay, Sundus, that's you. Okay, all right, sounds good. Good to have you here, Sundus. Appreciate you tuning in here. Manish says your video is hung. Not sure what you mean by that, Manish. Hopefully the video is okay and good. We got my friend Dwayne Moore in the house who says the video is fine. Manish, maybe try refreshing your browser. That should help. All right. So, folks, feel free to keep the comments coming. I'm going to bring on my special guest shortly. And again, it's going to be a fantastic session today. Any questions you have about your resume, about resume creation, resume tips, resume questions you have, feel free to put in the comments. And I'm bringing out my special guest, Dr. Rico, with me shortly. And make sure you give Dr. Rico a very warm welcome in the comments, folks. She's taking time out of her very busy schedule to join us here today to share her expertise about resumes. And guaranteed, folks, you're going to get a lot of great value here today. So make sure you got your notebooks out. For those of you more tech savvy, get out your iPads, get out your notebooks or whatever it is that you use, and be ready for a great session. All right, Dr. Rico, thank you so much. Welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining. Coming back on the show and helping folks out with amazing tips.
Of course, Dean. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I think that it was about a year ago that I was on.
Yeah,
I think like year and a half. It's been a while. It's been crazy
yeah,
over the past year or so. It's kind of what's been going on.
yeah. That's right. Yeah,
Um,
and I think you were on the show. I think it was probably right around when this whole pandemic thing started and everyone started
mhm,
going remote.
right.
And you just shared so much great advice. And I always thought about, I got to get Dr. Rico back on the show again. So I really appreciate your time. But just to kind of kick things off, Dr. Rico, can you give an introduction about yourself? Like let folks know a bit more about yourself and your background and what you
Yeah,
do.
sure, definitely. And if you hear a dog in the background, sorry about that. Every door closed. If she sees the mailman, she's off. She's running. So yeah, so definitely, my background, definitely being an English nerd. That's
Okay.
that's where I come from. So, bachelor's, master's, and PhD all in English. here in the States, University of Oklahoma and Texas A&M University. And yeah, just been doing this for over 15 years, worked primarily in kind of the oil, gas, and energy sector. And a lot of people, definitely in the energy sector right now, are really interested in tech. I mean, it's just been booming over the past year and a half, 2 years, where people are trying to transition into tech, or they found ways kind of in the middle to tech.
Right.
And so I was really excited to see what you've been coming out with your blog. And whenever I see things in your newsletter pop up, I'm always like, oh, what's he talking about this week? Because there are so many insider tips that job seekers just really need to know. I mean, honestly, they feel overwhelmed. They feel really frustrated, with kind of where to go and how to navigate hiring and the hiring process. And I think that definitely the interaction between hiring pros and recruiters and job seekers, transparency is a really, really good way to help everybody in the entire process, because otherwise people just get frustrated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially in the conditions that we're in right now, right? So I totally agree with that. And folks, yeah, for those of you tuning in, make sure you follow Dr. Rico. She posts amazing, fantastic content on LinkedIn. I think it's mostly on LinkedIn, the Dr. Rico. Is that right? Or
Yeah, I mainly do LinkedIn, because that's just the easiest way to reach people now. And
yeah,
I try to post, at least 4 times a week. Sometimes every day during Monday through Friday. But usually what I'm talking about is trying to get a feel, kind of a pulse for what's going on in different industries, and thinking through kind of what hiring practices are going on, and then also giving tips on resume, cover letter, LinkedIn, best practices. So nothing fluff, right? Not just saying, hey, keep going in your job search. It's like, duh. Everyone knows that,
yeah,
When I see
exactly.
posts like that, I'm just like, oh, come on. We don't need any more motivational,
Yeah, I mean, we're
memes.
past that, right?
Yeah, like give me some real meat, like how do I actually build out, a challenge action result statement on my resume or something like that. So yeah, that's the kind of content that I tend to post is, it's very substantial. I'm trying to give as many free tips as possible. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, so folks, definitely recommend you follow Dr. Rico. So make sure you follow her on LinkedIn. Posts a lot of great stuff, and no BS, no fluff, stuff that you folks can use in your job search, right? So, Dr. Rico, if we can kind of get right into it.
Yeah.
Now, we were kind of chatting on LinkedIn before, and I know you were mentioning that in current market conditions, like there's a certain mistake that you're seeing a lot of people make, or a couple of certain common mistakes. So what are you seeing right now, Dr. Rico? What is the most common mistake you're seeing people make in relation to their resumes?
Yeah. So the most common mistake that I'm seeing is really people not tailoring their resumes to the types of jobs. They're getting really overwhelmed with, needing to find a job, or trying to just send out their resume everywhere and anywhere. And what they're doing is just they're sending out a document that's kind of an everything in the kitchen sink approach.
Yeah.
So they have everything listed, whether it's relevant or not. And so the natural follow-up question that I get from people is, well, does that mean that I should just leave a gap in places where it's not relevant? The answer is no, absolutely not. You should not leave a gap. Yeah, if it's not relevant, what you should do is try your best to tailor that position to what you're shooting for. So, for instance, if you're shooting for an IT manager job, then everything on your resume should be tailored, laser focused in on hitting the main points of what it takes to be an IT manager.
Yeah.
Right? If you have other random things that don't necessarily align with that, you either need to tone them down, or you need to do your best to tailor your content as best you can to maybe some of the soft skills, or something that would relate to an IT manager position. So that's one of the biggest things that I see, is kind of that desperation mode where people just send out these really expansive, kind of resumes that aren't necessarily tailored.
Gotcha. Now, Dr. Rico, why do you think people are doing this? Like, is it? I mean, because it sounds pretty common sense, right? Like,
Yeah.
to cater the resume that way. Like, is it desperation, as you mentioned? Is it laziness, maybe, or what do you think? Why do you think people are doing this?
So there's a combination of factors going on, which is why I'm actually really glad to see that a lot more people in hiring positions are being open and transparent about the hiring process, because it's actually encouraging job seekers to not feel that desperation quite as much if they are tuning in and they are actually listening to you guys. Because before, I think a lot of people were feeling like they were just tossing resumes into a black hole and not getting any responses. And so to them, because a lot of people, before hadn't necessarily had to really actively job seek.
Yeah.
And COVID created a really challenging pool of candidates who had been at positions for a really long time in companies they trusted and enjoyed being at. And then they got released, and then they were on the market in the midst of, hundreds of thousands of other candidates looking for jobs. And so they ended up with that kind of black hole response where it was like, oh man, I'm not getting any response. So I think that a big reason why people end up doing this, well, two reasons. The first reason is because people are generally not sure. They're very hung up about how to tailor their resume, right? They don't really know the first step to take to tailor a resume. They see a job description, they see a company, they see their resume, and they go, I don't know how to tailor this. And that's really, really tough, especially for career changers. So people get really hung up if they're trying to change careers. They say, well, I don't know what I bring to the table. I've just always done my job, right? I don't know how to frame that. I don't know how to phrase it. And so that's the first thing. And the second thing is looking at a job description and looking at another one and looking at another one. Looking at tons and tons of job descriptions gets overwhelming. So what people end up doing is just apply. Unfortunately, it just takes a lot of time. And so while on the hiring side, you're receiving the resume and you're saying, oh my gosh, another person that didn't tailor their resume. On the other end, on the job seeker end, they're going, oh my gosh, this is my 50th application this week. I'm exhausted. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you have this kind of two sides to the coin of why people tend to not tailor. And, it's kind of this middle ground of people just feeling really overwhelmed by the entire process is kind of that's the consistent thread that I see. It's people feeling very concerned and overwhelmed.
Gotcha. So, I mean, if we were to talk about this topic about, I guess this is resume targeting. So can you maybe expand on, Dr. Rico, what is resume targeting? And I know you've covered why it's important, but why is it important for job seekers to understand this whole thing about resume targeting?
Yeah. So one of the first things that I always start with is just an image of, when I chat with job seekers, I tell them, all right, forget that you're a job seeker. Imagine that you've sat down at your desk at 7:30 in the morning. You're a recruiter. You have hundreds of different resumes lined up for different jobs within your pipeline. And you have to go through each and every one of them and assess if it's the right fit based off of the job description, essentially, because you may or may not know what that person does. You may or may not understand their role or the intricacies of what they do. Put yourself in that position, imagine yourself in that position, and then think through what you bring to the table for targeting, right? And so that's always kind of the first thing that I start with when I chat with people is, if you were to look at this resume and you were thinking through the targets you have, would you look like the right fit? Kind of put the shoe on the other foot. And it's very, simple and seems kind of silly, but whenever people do that, they go, typically no, right? And they go, wow, well, I have a lot of content here. It's pretty dense. It's a little bit tough to get through, but I know what I do. I know, the intricacies of what I specialize in. And I go, yeah, but they probably don't. So you got to spoon feed them. You got to let them know. And this is where I really get into the weeds in terms of targeting resumes. And why it's so important is because you're not always talking to a knowledgeable audience, right? And you have a fixed document in front of you. That's all you got. You don't have a person in front of you who can clarify what they do or how they do it well or anything like that. You have a document, typically, 1, 2, 3-page document that someone has to get through in order to get to the next document that they're going to read for that job description. And so the targeting helps people come across as being a very self-starter type of candidate. I mean, it really shows that they took the time. It shows that they value the time of the hiring manager or the recruiter by tailoring their content to that. It has an appealing look. It's easy to read. It's not super dense. And the targeting portion of that comes into focus whenever you look at the comparison between someone's resume and the job description. You know, there are websites that you can go to like JobScan that will help you kind of compare the applicant tracking system process between someone's resume and then a job description.
Yeah.
And ATSs are that's a whole that's a whole thing that people get freaked out about too.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, it's also a big part of the laser focusing in terms of saying, okay, I'm going to have to upload my resume into this thing. How is it going to parse? What's the information that this recruiter or this HR pro is going to get from, you know, looking at my resume and comparing it? And so, you know, the next step after saying, okay, put your shoes, change shoes with a hiring manager or recruiter. The next step that I always say is, okay, when you look at the job descriptions of what you're shooting for, where are the gaps?
Yeah.
Right? Where are the gaps that you see? Because if you're seeing a lot of gaps, that means that we really need to shift how you're branding yourself, right? We either need to think through your fit for that type of target, or we need to really, really refocus what you bring to the table. You know, so for someone who's coming, you know, from an oil, gas, and energy background, let's say operations manager or something like that, and now they want to be a data manager in the tech sector, there's going to be some consistencies, but there's also going to be a lot of weirdness going on.
Yeah.
You know? So whenever I'm chatting with someone about streamlining their content coming from that ops management background from a very niche industry, I'm always saying, okay, you have to assume that nobody knows what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. You have to assume that all this jargon that you have coming from oil and gas or whatever, that it's not going to be understood and it's actually going to muddy the waters for someone who's hiring in the tech space, right? Imagine you've only been at Amazon for the past 10 years and they're looking at your resume and they're seeing terms like Permian Basin or, you know, production evaluations, or like, I don't know what the heck this means. Why is this person applying for a data manager role? But this person over here, they know they've been doing data management for the past 15 years, but they're just not saying it very well, right? They're not framing it in a way that's going to make sense to this person over here. So it's that disjointedness that is where I really talk about laser focusing so much, is because we got to find the synthesis between those two things.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that because I experience this every now and then as well, where people who are coming from a different industry, like they're talking about a whole bunch of jargon and terms and stuff. Like I'm like, I don't even know what this is. Like, what does this even mean? Like, and it's just so true. Like you have to kind of tailor and cater your resume to with the reader in mind, because ultimately, sure, it might look good to yourself, but the question is it gonna appeal to the reader, and is it gonna make sense to the reader? Is it going to be relevant to them? So I totally agree with that. And a targeted resume, I mean, the difference is between a targeted resume and a more generic. I mean, it's like night and day, right?
Yeah.
Like as a recruiter, when I'm reading over a resume that I know has been catered to the job I'm recruiting on, like I get really excited because I'm like, whoa, this directly speaks to what I'm looking for in an ideal candidate. Sure, some things might be missing, but I feel more motivated to actually pick up the phone and give the person a call. So I mean, I totally agree with that, and it's very, very important for those of you tuning in and listening. It is very, very important. Now, obviously, when you come down to Dr. Rico, like customizing your resume, it's very time consuming. It can be very time consuming, right? Especially if you're applying for different companies. Maybe some folks out there they've got kids, they've got a whole bunch of other stuff going on. Maybe they've got they're currently employed, they're working. How do you manage this? Like, what are some tips that you can share with the viewers for, on the one side, yes, customizing and targeting the resume, but how do you do this in a time efficient or time effective manner, if possible?
Yeah. So the best way to do this is to reverse engineer your entire career move. right? So rather than just saying, oh yeah, okay, I have skill sets in XYZ, I'm going to shoot for A through Z, right? And being all over the place. Instead of doing that, it's really, really wise to narrow down your idea of where you'd like to go next. Imagine yourself in the next 3 years and say, okay, I've been in product management. I would really like to land a senior product manager role in the tech space. I'm coming from the power industry and I really like to land in the tech space. Okay, so how do I reverse engineer this process? Well, the first thing I'm going to have to do is look at a ridiculous amount of job descriptions, right? And I'm going to have to identify the types of jobs. What are the different types of titles people might be using too? Because there can be terms like product champion or, different terms that, companies will use whenever you switch sectors. And so identifying those types of things is a really good place to start, because then you can start collecting data on the types of skill sets that they require for those types of jobs. There's actually a word bubble website that I use. It's called Word It Out.
Okay. Word It Out.
Yeah, and you can, take a whole bunch of content. Like, for instance, if you were to say, okay, I have this job description, but I really don't know what's going to be the most important part, to include on my key skills section, then plop it into Word It Out, and it's going to basically have the most important terms that come up the most frequently come up in large portions of the bubble. So this can be helpful for people who are more visual. Another way to do this is to pull job descriptions and say, okay, I've been in product management. Now I want to hit a senior product manager role. The big difference that I'm seeing with senior product manager as opposed to what I do is managing people, right? For instance. So that means that whenever you're tailoring or laser focusing your resume, you need to have specific skills lined up. This is the big way that I tailor resumes so that it's easier and faster. I have the top fourth portion of the resume lined up that's very skills focused. Okay. And this doesn't mean that I just have a whole bunch of terms just randomly plopped on there. What I do is I'm basically looking at job descriptions for what someone is trying to target, and then I identify the top 3. Okay. So the human mind can really only function in 3s. You give them more than 3, people are going to go, too much. Right. So I may identify something like, product lifecycle management, let's see, product teams leadership, and maybe research and development, right? Maybe those are the 3 skill sets that I identify as being the most important, kind of based off of all the job descriptions that I'm looking through. Well, then I'm going to use the top fourth portion of the resume to have those 3 lined up. Okay, so I'll put those 3 here. And then I give actual examples of how someone has done that in their career so far, right? Rather than just saying, I'm great at delivering the product lifecycle. Okay, how? How have you done that? That's going to be the next question that a recruiter is going to ask is, great. So does everyone else who's applying for this job. Can you tell me how you've done that? So that's what makes it a lot easier to basically take, 10 to 15 minutes to tailor your resume to each job description, is if you have those skills already lined up for a senior product manager focus, then that stuff isn't going to change that much, right? You're not going to be having to change the entire resume each time because you're not shooting for 5 different targets. You're shooting for one main target, but you're tailoring it based off of each job description. So maybe one job description mentions go-to-market strategy a lot. Well, then you're going to want to change certain parts of your resume to talk about go-to-market strategy, right? Maybe another one wants you to have startup experience. Okay, then if you have startup experience, highlight that at the top. Okay, so you're kind of tailoring based on that. And if you have multiple targets, if you say, but well, I don't only want to shoot for senior product manager, I also want to shoot for a project manager job. Well, then you need a second resume. Stop trying to make one resume fit everything. So laser focusing also, comes into play whenever you're thinking through different targets. And that way you can say, okay, I can apply broadly. I can apply to either product manager jobs or project manager jobs, but I'm laser focusing on each of these so that I get traction a lot faster rather than just spewing out a resume for each and every type of job and hoping that somebody sees it and that it sticks, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's such great advice, Dr. Rico, because and I'm thinking of this as a recruiter as well. Like, when I look over a resume and there's like way too many types of positions, like, project manager slash
Yep.
software developer slash data analyst slash I don't know, like scuba diver, like there's like everything, right? You know what I mean? Like, and then the what the recruiter is thinking is, first of all, does this person know what they want?
Right.
The second thing is, should I be spending time with this candidate? Because what if they apply for the role for the project manager, but their real goal, their real target is one of those other positions? Then it's a complete waste of time for the organization as well as the recruiter as well, at least from their standpoint. So I think this is so important, like to be very targeted. Again, folks, I mean, what I'm getting from you, Dr. Rico, is you have to be strategic. You got to be really targeted in terms of what you want to, how you want to present yourself and your resume. And also, I really like what you mentioned about the examples. And this is something I see missing from so many resumes of probably great people, is they only talk about the what, like, I did XYZ, but there's that big disconnect. Like, you're not talking about, okay, so what did you do? Like, what exactly did you do? What was the outcome? What was the impact? So I think that is so important. And again, so many people are missing this from their resume, and it's really what's going to help people stand out, I believe. So I 100% agree with you on that.
It's very duties based. Yeah, kind of
Yeah.
duties and responsibilities based. It almost reads like a job description, which
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
yeah, which it's tricky, right? Because people get really concerned about ATS matching. And so they say,
Yeah.
but am I not supposed to include, some of those jobs and duties, from the job description? I say, well, sure, you can include the wording, but you need to give actual examples of how you've done it. You
Yeah.
can't just
For sure.
only use verbatim, you know, parts of those, responsibilities and then just leave it at that and say, well, yeah, I've done it. It's like, well, sure. So is everyone else who's applying for the job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to get, found on the ATS, but it's another thing to grab the reader's attention, right? Because
Yeah.
okay, so you got your resume showed up on the list. Now someone's reading it, but are you really going to capture their attention? That's the other thing that not too many people really think about it, and this is why it's so important. So that means now, I'm pretty sure I asked you this on the last time you were on the show as well, Dr. Rico. But what are your thoughts on functional resumes? Like, are they even
Mm,
like? I mean, what's the deal with those? Like, are they even relevant anymore? Like, are they ever a good idea?
right. Well, I know we got to be reverse chronological. That's got to
Yeah,
stick around. Yeah, because I see different formats, and this is typically career changers. A lot of people typically get really nervous about matching. They're doing their best to try to
yeah,
match their experience. And so what they do is they just give, let's say that they've been, a geoscientist or something really technical,
yeah.
right? And now they want to be a project manager. And so instead of doing the reverse chronological format, that's preferred,
Hmm. Yeah,
that makes sense to a recruiter. Instead, they just go through and say a whole bunch of random stuff about the project management things that they've done with no
yeah,
context for when they did it, who they did it with, and it's just kind of plopped on there. And that's a problem. That's
yeah,
a huge problem because then there's a lot of weirdness going on and red flags for a recruiter or hiring pro because they're going, okay, I don't know what company you did this for. I don't know how long the project took. I don't know, did you work with clients? If so, who? Um, and so, no, we definitely, from top to bottom of a document, left to right, very standard document, we want to keep it pretty traditional in that sense. And don't, and not necessarily go through and start, kind of blocking out certain sections that are only based on skills, but with no context. We want to make
yeah,
sure that we still have your most recent work experience and then run down to the bottom of the page. And of course, making sure that that work experience is tailored as much as possible to the target. But yeah, when in doubt, keep it classic. We don't
yeah.
want to go crazy with that stuff. And that's kind of why I do the hybrid, honestly, is
Okay.
because you do want it to be skills based in the sense that you're showcasing someone's kind of, career narrative so far. That's why I use that top fourth portion to kind of break apart some of that stuff at the top. And then I do have a key skills section just to make sure that, those terms pop up because a lot of applications will require you to put in terms, so you can just copy and paste it and plop it in.
Okay.
But yeah, then you got to have professional work history straight down, nothing crazy.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, sounds good. Now, just for the viewers, so Sundus and Suyash, I do see your questions. We're gonna get to your questions shortly. But anyone else tuning in, don't be shy. If you have any questions for Dr. Rico, feel free to put it in the comments regarding resumes, and we're gonna get to the questions part shortly. Now, Dr. Rico, can you share a couple of resume best practices?
Yeah, resume best practices. Yeah, so these have changed a lot over the years. Before with resumes, there's definitely the idea that you needed to have 1-inch margins all around, right?
Yeah.
Plenty of white space, and then people's resumes would get pushed really awkwardly. It'd have like page and a half and all that. So switching to narrow margins is actually pretty smart. I mean, try not to have single space. Not in narrow margins, because that's just going to be way too jarring. Someone's not going to be
Yeah.
able to read that very well. But changing your spacing up to 1.3 or something like that, so that it's easier to scan, but having narrow margins so that there's less, kind of white space for someone who's reading it to kind of be jumping back and forth and tiring their eyes out.
Yeah.
That's kind of a new best practice that's kind of popped up in the past few years that I've been seeing a lot of
Okay.
recruiters request. Um, you know, Page length is always a big question, and I get this all the time. If you're an entry-level candidate, you should only have 1 page.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, that's it. That's how it is. If you are roughly 7 years or more, you can push to 2. And of course, this all depends on your target. If you have a lot of really tailored, really great content that is laser focused in on your target, and you have 5 years, but 2 pages of content, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's all right. If you can tighten it up, if you have a page and a half or something, do your best to tighten it up and, kind of try to keep it. But from what I've always seen, if someone has really tailored content and they have stripped out some really important stuff, then whenever they go on the job market and they're explaining this stuff, during an interview, if they get the chance to interview, typically hiring managers would be like, "Why didn't you put this on your resume?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
People are like, "Well, I'm trying to keep it to 1 page." And they're like, "I would have much rather just known that you did that. You
Yeah.
know, put it to 2 pages. I'll gladly read 2 pages that's completely laser focused on what I'm hiring for." So that's kind of the trade-off, right? Is if you have 2 pages, you got to make sure that it's going to be meaningful and it's actually going to be impactful for that hiring manager to read. If it's just fluff, or if you're just being wordy, then no, you got to edit and you got to cut it down. So yeah, page length, 3 pages is generally fine for people who are at the executive level, or board members, or things like that, because at that point it's kind of expected that someone is going to be able to read, and expect to have all of that content built out, because they'll have community involvement and stuff like that too.
Right.
And this also varies based off region. I mean,
Yeah.
here in the States and in Canada, this is typically the rule. We got the 1-2 page, rule that's generally best. But if you go in the Middle East or Europe, a
Yeah.
lot of them expect giant CVs. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
they're fine with 4 to 6 page CVs. So region is also important if you're looking to make a move abroad. Then kind of looking up best practices for that specific region. Sometimes they'll even want to know your birthday, and this is typical for Middle East, and
Yeah.
sometimes South America. But kind of looking up some of the best practices based off the region is a really good practice, because I know that here in the States, you don't want to have things like a photo on your
Yeah.
resume.
Well, same in Canada as well. Yeah.
Yeah, you really don't want to have that. But abroad, if
Yeah.
you go to South America or the Middle East, or even sometimes in Europe, it's fine.
It's
That's
normal. Yeah.
normal. And and they expect it. Um, so yeah, there are some differences in resumes best practices for that, but definitely keeping the reverse chronological format. I can't drill that in enough.
Yeah.
Don't get all weird. Don't start with your earliest experience. Don't do that. And if possible, tighten up your early career if it goes past 10 to 12 years. Um, unless it's very tailored to your target and you feel like there's a lot of value that's going to be delivered by telling them what you did 15 years ago,
Yeah.
you don't necessarily need to go in depth on that experience because typically recruiters are going to say it was 15 years ago. Where
Yeah.
that's quite a bit ago. Unless you were a game changer in your industry, then we don't necessarily need to go in depth on that. And along with that, a lot of things that I do suggest include not adding a graduation date
Mm.
for, when you graduated from college or high school or anything like that. It's not necessary.
Yeah.
A recruiter just needs to know if you have the degree. That's all I
Yeah.
need to know. Do you have the bachelor's? Do you have the master's? Cool. Moving on.
Yeah.
They don't need to know that you graduated in 1973. Just don't do it. Doesn't matter. So those types of best practices are what I find help kind of freshen up a resume and, make it a bit less clunky and avoid any unnecessary, issues. Making sure that all the text is very easy to read and that it's embedded onto the page. Stop using these weird formats and templates.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I
Oh,
so agree with that. Oh my gosh.
yeah. Just
Yeah.
just use a regular Word doc. Regular Word doc. Plug in content into the Word doc. Upload the doc into the application.
Yeah.
I mean, you can use, for lack of a better term, fancy, you can make it look fancier by using shading
Mhm.
or a line or something, but you don't need to be adding in text boxes
Yeah.
or putting things into headers or adding graphics or just keep it clean, please, guys, because I know that everyone's concerned about ATSs. And the worst thing you can do is grab one of those fancy templates that has stuff all over the place and you're
Yeah.
trying to plug in information and you have the skills that have like percentages or little dots. Stop.
Yeah.
Do you have the skill or not? If you have the skill, it goes in the skills section. If you don't list it.
Yeah.
Don't give yourself a 4 out of 5 on, data management. Just say data management, you know?
Yeah.
So that's been a huge pet peeve of mine that I've seen on resumes is people just trying all these fancy
Yeah. I see
graphic.
that as well. I mean,
Yeah,
just because it looks fancy does not mean it's practical, right? Like you
right.
mentioned the ATS. I mean, that's so true because not all ATSs are as effective in transcribing it into a readable format within the ATS.
Right.
And just kind of a side note for those of you who are not aware, recruiters, like when they're looking at resumes on the ATS, typically they're not downloading each resume individually. They
Right.
pretty much in most ATS is how it works is you hover your mouse on the resume file, and the ATS system either kind of creates like something visual that they can see on the resume, or sometimes it just kind of translates the resume into a readable format within the candidate's file. And sometimes, just like how Dr. Rico is saying, is because a lot of you are doing a lot of fancy stuff. Sometimes what we see is just a whole bunch of scrambled up words and letters, and we might not take the time to actually download your resume. It's like, hey, I'm just going to move on to the next candidate,
Yep.
right? So don't try to be cute, folks. Just keep it simple, easy format, easy structure, just like how Dr. Rico's saying,
Yeah.
because you want to be practical as well.
If you can't save it in a docx, then it's a problem. Like
Yeah.
if you can't, and if the formatting won't stick, if it gets all wonky and weird, then yeah, no, that's not a good resume format. It should look correct whenever you pull it up as a PDF or as a docx. It should look basically the same, depending on,
Yeah.
there may be some differences based off the browser, if it's a Mac or a whatever, but that remains true also for font. I mean, like sans serif fonts, if you're using,
Yeah.
I use Arial and Book Antiqua pretty much across the board because they're classic. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter if you have, a Mac or a PC, it stays the same. It's not going to get all weird. And, you're not going to have it's not going to look really, it's just, you know what I mean? Like whenever you
Yeah,
skim
yeah,
over it and things are all jumbled and looking weird, the font sometimes can also be a big part of that. So I just try to keep it very, very classic, you know.
yeah. And Dr. Rico, should we avoid colorful fonts as well? Is that a bad idea? That's a bad
Yeah.
idea.
You're asking me as a rhetorical question, aren't you? You're
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
please,
Yeah.
please stop. Yes, no, don't ever use color in your font. Black. Use black font. Um, yeah, no, 100%. The only time that I'll use color is honestly in a shading, right? So I might
Yeah,
highlight the top header and I might turn it like a dark teal or a charcoal gray or something like that, and then have the text be white so that it pops. But the rest of my text, all of my body text, that's all black on a
yeah.
white page. That is not looking crazy. It's only to draw attention to certain sections, but you should never have any other color of text.
Yeah, totally agree with that. All right, so I'm going to get into my final question for you, Dr. Rico. In the meantime, folks, any questions for Dr. Rico, feel free to put in the comments. I will get to Sundas your question, and I believe Suyash and Debab Jyoti has a question as well. I'm going to get to that shortly. But kind of the final question here, Dr. Rico, cover letters, are they dead? Are they a thing of the past? Should people still submit these? I mean, what are your thoughts on cover letters?
Yeah, I get this question all the time. So there are definitely going to be recruiters and HR pros who don't read them.
Yeah,
You know, that just doesn't matter to them. They don't see that as, it's an extra step. They'd much rather just look at the resume and LinkedIn and just be done with it. But let's say you have 5 recruiters, in your poll, and you ask them, hey, how many of you read cover letters? And 2 of them don't, but 3 of them do.
yeah, yeah,
You need a cover letter. You still need a cover letter. So no, cover letters are not dead. I still chat with people who are in the hiring space who say, no, I base my decision on pulling someone in for an interview
hmm,
or going to, basically the last run of candidates based off the cover letter.
yeah,
I want to make sure that they can write well. That's a big part, if you
hmm,
can't write well. They also want to make sure that someone has taken the time to tailor their content to the company and to the role.
yeah,
So it's that added step of someone basically upping their professionalism to say, I took the time to really consider this role, whereas, XYZ candidates did not. So it kind of gives you a leg up in some sense. Um, One practice that I'm seeing happen, and of course, I mean, I think this is already really common in the UK, but having a cover letter basically as an additional page
hmm,
um, to your resume. So if someone doesn't have a link to say, upload your cover letter here, but you really want them to read a cover letter, then you just add the cover letter to basically make it kind of the last page of your resume almost. And what
okay,
I'm seeing is, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of hiring managers actually be okay with that.
okay,
Um, I think that it really depends. I mean, I typically tell someone, hey, I don't usually do that. I follow the directions to the letter. If someone says insert resume, I insert resume.
yeah,
Just because job application processes, some people, you want to follow the directions as clearly as possible.
yeah.
But it depends, it depends on region. It depends on how much of a fit you see that you are for that job. And if you see it's going to add value, then, attaching it, there can be, but it's still, there's some wiggle room. I don't know if you've seen that pop up recently, Dean.
No, I haven't really seen that myself, but I would like to go back to what you said before. It does differ from recruiter to recruiter. Like myself, I just skip to the resume personally myself, but that's not the case with every recruiter out there, right, folks? For those of you tuning in, there are recruiters out there that do pay attention to the actual cover letter itself, and I would say definitely the corporate recruiters, right? The recruiters that are working internally at the organization, they're probably more likely to reach the cover letter versus someone on the recruitment agency side of the table, such as myself. We're probably going to skip right to the resume, get to the real meat of what you bring to the table, and then give you a phone call.
Right.
So I definitely agree with what you're saying, Dr. Rico. It's better to have a cover letter versus not have one at all, if
Right.
at all possible. Now, quick question: like, do you have a quick, maybe number one tip about how to write a good cover letter, or any advice for people who want
Mm.
to write a good cover letter?
It's going to be the same advice. It's going to be
Yeah,
laser focusing,
yeah,
right? If there's one thing that people take away from this talk, I want them to get the laser focusing. thing.
Gotcha.
Right. So with a cover letter, I think that honestly, the biggest reason why hiring pros and recruiters don't read cover letters is because they tend to be fluff. They say nothing. It's,
Yeah.
People just write very passionate about XYZ, really interested in this job, think I'd be the best fit, blah, 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 blah. They don't actually give anything of substance in the cover letter. It's just generic.
Yeah.
And so when you're writing a cover letter, you should actively try to not be generic, right? If every sentence that you write, you should ask yourself, would someone else write this sentence?
Yeah.
Right? Have I seen this sentence anywhere else? Does it sound like a very generic thing someone would say? So as much as you can when you're writing cover letters, and this is a big reason why, I basically include some kind of career narrative, giving someone a sense of where someone has come from to where they are today, right? Sometimes names of companies, years in certain roles can help. As much as you can, include hard data, right? I mean, this is true for resume, cover letter, LinkedIn. Hard data speaks volumes above just words and fluff, right? So if you can tell someone that you have spent 7+ years in a management role in XYZ positions, that's going to matter a lot more than someone saying served, multiple years in as a manager, right? But this is what people do. They do this a lot, where they just keep it very generic, and they think, well, they'll ask additional questions if they really care. And I say, well, no, you're not going to get to the interview stage because you didn't tell them. People only know what you tell them. So you have to be very upfront and very clear about what you bring to the table based off their requirements. And a lot of times this comes down to scouring that job description, going to the minimum qualifications or requirements section and saying, okay, they are requiring 10+ years in a management role. They are requiring a bachelor's in engineering. They're requiring, right? And so that's the content you want to grab and make sure that you weave into your cover letter, because otherwise it's just going to be fluff. No one's going to care.
Yeah, great advice there. And just to kind of add to that, for those of you, like an analogy that I like to think about is, it's like, when you're using something very generic, it's almost like, how you sometimes get like a telemarketing or a sales call from someone, and you can tell they're just reading a script.
Right.
It can come across the same way on your cover letter or even on your resume if you're just, just writing something very generic, right? You're like, yeah, this was not probably written by this person, or they probably got it off Google or something like that. So, again, great piece of advice there, Dr. Rico. So as we kind of wrap up the segment, and again, folks, any questions for Dr. Rico, feel free to put in the comments. But Dr. Rico, can you let the viewers know more about your services and how you can help them, for those of the people out there that might want to connect with you?
Yeah, sure. So I'll actually include in the comments, I'll include the link to my LinkedIn profile, because that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. My company is called Rico Editorial Services, and I offer support for resume, cover letter, and LinkedIn building. I've been doing it for 15 years, worked with a lot of high level, senior executives and CEOs in kind of that oil, gas, and energy space, but also within telecommunications, pharmaceutical, medical, tech. I mean, you name it. It's, I've worked across a lot of different sectors. So, so feel free to reach out to me. If you'd like to set up a consultation as well, I'll include, kind of a link in the comments there as well, if you'd like to set up a time to chat and kind of go over your materials and see what might be missing.
Awesome. And also, Dr. Rico, what is the best way for people to connect with you on social media? I know you mentioned LinkedIn is your main thing, and what type of content is it videos? Is it mostly resume related? Like, what type of content can people expect from you on LinkedIn?
Yeah. So on LinkedIn, typically I post daily, kind of, tips and things like that. I used to do videos. So I do have some videos on my YouTube channel. If you go to my LinkedIn profile, you'll be able to see in the about and summary the links to all of those. So I have a link to my website, a link to my YouTube channel, and things like that. So you'd be able to click on those and kind of find me. And then also a link to my consultation page if you'd like to book one.
Awesome, fantastic. So folks, I can't recommend any further. Like, you should definitely follow Dr. Rico. Great content on LinkedIn. So make sure you follow her and connect with her for again, practical no fluff advice in regards to your resume. All right. So that being said, if you have a few more minutes, Dr. Rico, we have a couple of questions from the comments. Are you still okay on time?
Yeah, sure. I was actually looking. It looks like I'm not able to make a comment on
Yeah.
here.
Okay, got you. Well, you can share your link in the private chat. I will share it in the comments for
Awesome.
everyone to see. So yeah, just
Okay, well,
drop it in
that's
the private chat. I'll share that. Now we have a question from Sunda. So Sunda says, I have always had a hard time keeping my resume short. I've been trying bolding some keywords and have received some good feedback, but I want to know if there's a better way to list things in the resume. And how do employers feel about resumes created using something like Canva, example 2-page PDF? I've been receiving some good feedback on it from some recruiters, but wanted to see what the general response is with recruiters and employers. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So please don't use Canva.
Yeah.
I use Canva to build LinkedIn banners. But the Canva format, you can only save it in PDF or a JPEG or a PNG. So whenever you can only save in those types of formats, it's really not going to parse very well through tracking systems. You may run into situations where if you're sharing your resume directly with colleagues or network connections or directly with a hiring manager, if you are emailing it to someone, not putting it through an application system, a format like that will be okay. But that should be used only for kind of a marketing resume. That shouldn't be used as a functional resume for whenever you're applying. Let's say you're on the job hunt and you're applying to tens of different jobs every day. That should not be the resume that you use for that. So thinking through, let's see, better ways to list things in the resume. So the best way to list things in your resume is really to focus, right? Drafting, of course, is a really extensive process. This is a big reason why people pay me to do this, right? The reason why I got the doctorate in English is because it takes years and years and years and years and years and years of just writing over and over and over and drafting and redrafting and redrafting to tighten up your wording and to make sure that you can keep things to a certain page length or a certain formatting. So if you're trying to keep things to a certain page, I think you said just resume short and trying to bold keywords. Yeah, definitely. You can bold keywords. Be careful about bolding in italics, though. I've seen people go crazy with it.
Yeah.
And it's jarring, right? So
Yeah.
be really careful. If you do bold, it should really be the only time that I bold is company names, the title, position title that you had, and then certain sections like in the skills section up in the top fourth portion, I'll bold those. But I don't really do much more bolding or italics than that because when you start going through, I've seen people actually have, let's say we have a paragraph of text and they're wanting to make sure that the recruiter sees certain portions of the text, right? And so what they do is they bold or italicize certain areas. Well, you need to be prepared for that recruiter to only read those sections because imagine when you were in school and you were studying for a test and all you did was take a highlighter and you highlighted certain sections of a paragraph. It's pretty much what you're doing. And so you have to expect your reader to only read those areas because that's just naturally what the eye will do. And if you're doing that, if that's all they're going to read anyway, then why are you including all the rest of those words? So just be very judicious in how you are drawing someone's eye to the content on your document. And then be also very careful about the format that you're putting it in. So.
Awesome advice there. So Sundis, hope that helps. And thanks for your question. We got a question from Suyash. So Suyash says, if duties and responsibilities along with the examples are included for each job experience, then the length of the resume increases tremendously with each relevant experience. I guess so. Any comments regarding that, Amanda, Dr. Rico? Like, how do you make sure that you don't, going into detail about your impact and what you accomplished? Like, how do you prevent that from also making your resume maybe too long? It will come down to targeting, I would think, but
Yeah, no, definitely. So there are going to be some terms and phrases that you have in there that are bullet points that are just very generic, right? Be careful, and I'll say it again, you do not want to come across as generic. You don't want to come across generic as in any point in your materials, your cover letter, LinkedIn, resume. Those three are kind of the trifecta of what people are going to look at in the hiring stage. So, the less generic that you can look, which means not necessarily just including job duties and responsibilities. What I'll see happen a lot is people include repetitive job duties and responsibilities. So for each job, they'll have pretty much the exact same thing listed. Their top 3 bullet points are always the same. Well, mix it up, right? Tighten it up, give actual examples of how you've done those things, not just listing the duties, but thinking about some of the challenges that you've handled. This is one of the first questions that I always start with on a consultation. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've dealt with in the past 2 years?
Yeah.
What have you struggled with? And how did you overcome it? Right? So how did you solve it? Because that's going to be a big question you're going to get in the hiring process is,
Absolutely.
people are going to care about what you've done recently. So past 3 years, 5 years, be thinking about some of the biggest wins and then how you executed and solved problems. And that's going to be a great way to tighten up rather than just listing repetitive job descriptions over and over. Think through actual examples of how you've achieved things rather than just duties.
Great advice there. So Siyash, hope that helps, and thanks for your question. We got a question from David Jyoti, who says, for any role when we apply with the CV resume as a candidate, is it okay to capture only the task we did in the past that matches with the JD? Or can we add more details other than the JD that we may have worked on in the past? I think you probably have kind of answered this already, Dr. Rico, but anything you want to add to that in terms of the relevance and the targeting in terms of what you're talking about?
Right. So I can see why this question is still relevant because, we're trying to tailor to a job description in many cases. And so including details from the job description can be helpful.
Yeah.
But of course, we don't want to we want a synthesis, right? We want a combination between what's listed on the job description and the core competencies and requirements that they want, as well as what you actually bring to the table. So you want to find that middle ground, right? So you want to capture, it says, let's see, is candidates okay to only capture the task that we did in the past that matches, or can we add details? Okay, yeah. So definitely you can add details, but be careful to not get too wordy.
Yeah.
Right. So there are times where I'll see bullet points that are like 4 lines long. Stop yourself. Stop doing this. It's too long, right? No one is going to read a 4-line bullet point. Same thing with block paragraphs. If you have a giant paragraph that is this big, no one is going to read that entire paragraph. That's just again, this is how the human mind and the human eye works. If you give someone a giant block of text, it is going to be really, really hard unless they read a lot and they're really good at reading. It's going to be really hard for them to do that. Even if they are good at reading, you have to remember, put your shoes on the other foot.
Yeah.
When you're a hiring manager or recruiter, this is probably the 50th resume that you've read. Okay, imagine that. Imagine that this is the 50th resume you've read. Will you want to read that block paragraph? Are you going to want to read that content? So, keep that in mind as well when you're thinking of adding extra details that may not be relevant.
Awesome. Great advice there. David Jyoti, hope that helps. Thanks for your question. Sundis says, thank you so much. Wonderful tips. Awesome, Sundis. We got Steve Ost from Carrollton, Texas. There's been a lot of discussion recently regarding posting salaries in the job description so job seekers aren't wasting their time. The first question I get in an in-person interview is what my salary requirements are. Has there been any thoughts of including the required base compensation in a resume, or does this set up the job seeker for potential low offers?
I personally would not do that, but Dean, you're on the recruiting side. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say, Steve, in my opinion, I would say no. I mean, don't talk about your resume sorry, don't talk about your salary on your resume, because you don't want to rule yourself out. Because look, there are some cases where you might be in a call with a recruiter or a hiring manager. Maybe your salary and compensation is higher than their budget, but given the fact that they spoke to you, they know about all the amazing things you can do for them and all that, they're more open to still carrying on the interview process and considering you, versus them seeing that you're over budget on the resume potentially and not giving you a phone call at all, right? until a conversation takes place, you can't really have that conversation, that discussion to see if it makes sense for both parties to move ahead. And yeah, just like you said, Steve, this might end up with you receiving something maybe that's lower than what they're willing to offer someone for the role. So I would suggest leave it off your resume. There's no need for you to mention that on your resume. I'd rather you have that conversation on the phone or in person when you're in an actual conversation with them, and you had the opportunity to really sell them on your value, what you bring to the table, and all that stuff.
Yeah. Then you have some wiggle room.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Steve, hope that helps. Let us know in the comments. And I believe that's all the question. Well, we got we got my friend Peter in the house. So Peter, good to have you here. Peter says, "Hi, Dr. Rico and Dean. Sorry I missed the majority of the session, so this might have been discussed. Which is better, bullet points or full sentences?"
Okay. So when you say full sentences, I'm assuming that you're meaning kind of a block of text. So I will generally mix this up. Okay. So what I do is, let's say we have your professional work history here. We have your first entry. We have the company name, your title of what you had, the dates all lined up, the location. And then I have a brief blurb, right? Nothing giant, but a brief blurb below that outlines basically what your scope of responsibility was. So I want someone to know immediately if you were recruited, if you were promoted, what the move was that you took to get there in your career progression, right? So that's kind of the brief overview, and then bullet points below that. So bullet points with achievements, outlining some of the challenges that you overcame, or things like that with hard data. So what this does typically is it allows the hiring manager or the recruiter to assess if you've been given increased responsibility over your career. And if so, what did that look like, right? If you're promoted 3 times in a company, that's great.
Yeah.
And that's something that a recruiter wants to know immediately. They don't want it to be built in somewhere random. They want to know, wow, they were promoted 3 times over 8 years. That's great. Let's see why, right? And then they're going to go through and figure that out. This is also really relevant whenever you have multiple pages of a resume, because whenever you go to a second page, there's a point to where you need to give them the meat, as much of the meat as possible on that first page, even if you're pushing to a second. It's a big reason why I use the top 4th portion of the resume to give that overview, so that somebody can see, okay, I see that they, did this role from 2009 to 2014. Okay, well, that's not on the first page, but I know to go to the second to go and find what they did in that role, right? So there's it's almost like an index. You're kind of leading people, guiding them throughout kind of your career narrative, your career history, so that then you have a better chance of someone actually wanting to read the entire document, because they're being it's appealing, it's easy to read, it's streamlined, there's not a whole bunch of content all over the place. So, if you do include full sentences, keep it brief.
Awesome. Great advice there. So Peter, hope that helps. And thanks for tuning in. And we got Steve says, thanks for the feedback. Good points. Awesome. So, I mean, Dr. Rico, you definitely shared so much great advice here. And thanks so much for your time. We're a little bit over an hour, so appreciate you spending a whole bunch of time with us. And look, my key takeaways from what you've shared with us today is, be strategic, be targeted, cut out the fluff, focus on the relevant stuff and the stuff that's gonna. And the other thing that was my key takeaway was, put yourself in the shoes of the reader, right? Like, who's gonna be reading over your resume? What's going to appeal to them? What's going to get their attention? Because you don't want to get so caught up in putting everything that you've ever done on your resume. Like, you got to make sure it communicates to the person reading it. So again, thanks so much, Dr. Rico. So much great information. Folks, make sure you thank Dr. Rico in the comments. I did share Dr. Rico's LinkedIn profile link in the comments as well. So make sure you follow her, connect with her for more great content. And I'd definitely love to have you back on the show sometime again in the future, of course, Dr. Rico, for more resume tips and advice. But thanks again so much. And thanks to all of you who tuned in. And make sure you share your feedback in the comments as well.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Dean. I really appreciate it. And it was a blast.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dr. Rico. So, folks, thanks, everyone, for tuning in. If you want to tune in again, I do my live stream every week on Wednesdays, 11 a.m. Eastern time zone. I share job search tips, advice, and strategies. So for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, if you feel that you got a lot of value out of this session, I do have future guests every now and then on the show as well, such as Dr. Rico, to share practical, actionable tips and advice that you can apply to your job search. Right. So stay close to me. Make sure you follow me. Feel free to connect with me if we're not connected yet. And if there's any way I can personally assist you, make sure you definitely let me know. And again, if you're an IT professional, you're looking for your next career opportunity in Canada, definitely feel free to give me a shout. And if there's any way I can assist you, I'll definitely do my best to assist you. And again, if you're an organization looking for tech talent and you're experiencing challenges right now in recruiting and finding people for your organization, definitely reach out and let me know. And I'm happy to see if there's any way I can assist you. All right. Everyone else, take care, stay in touch, stay positive. And look, folks, just like how Dr. Rico said, be targeted. All right. Like those were my key. That was my key takeaway from the advice she gave today was you got to be strategic. You got to be targeted. You got to put yourself in the shoes of the other person, right? The person that you're going to be presenting your resume to. And I would say this applies not just to your resume, but your conversations with recruiters, your conversations with hiring managers, those interviews you're going for, right? It's very easy for us to kind of fall in love with the sound of our own voice and start talking about all the amazing things we've done. And of course, there's a lot of amazing things we've all each done as individuals. But the question is, folks, and this is the parting thought I want to leave you with is, the question is it relevant to the person, right? To the individual that you're presenting yourself to? Is it relevant to them? Does it speak to the problems and pain points they're currently experiencing? Does it speak to the potential ROI they need your help in achieving? Does it speak to the project that they've got going on, right? That is the key thing. So I want you folks to think about that when you're going over your resume, when you're going over you're practicing your interview pitch, you're practicing how you're going to be presenting yourself to others. Make sure you're speaking to and communicating to what would most appeal and be relevant to the other party. All right. So with that said, folks, thanks everyone for tuning in. Hope everyone got amazing value out of today's session. Have a wonderful week. Keep pushing through. Don't give up. Stay positive. And I'll see you around next week, Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern time zone, folks. Everyone have a fantastic week ahead. Take care.